Welcome to the fifth video in this series of making a simple 2D platformer where we create traps and have the player have lives and have him teleport back to the start whenever he takes damage. In the last video, we left off with these pineapple prefabs and our player, who can now run around and jump on this level with the camera following him. In this video, I'd like to create traps so that the player can get hurt and restart the level. So if we go into the Pixel Adventure 1 folder, inside of Assets, Traps, and there's so many traps here, but today we're going to be using the spikes. Then we see we have one sprite here. If we drag the sprite into the hierarchy, we have this little sprite. You see that it's pretty far away. So if we want to change this position to like -125, and then go back, find it, we'll see that it's around right here. We can move it up and we can see that it's really small. So we can just change the scale to something like 6, and then that looks a lot better. So we can rename this from idle to spike, and then if we move it, and then maybe we can put it right here, right on this platform right here. And what we'll want to add to this is a box collider 2D. And then we can change this collider. We can change it down to the spikes so we don't actually get hit unless we're really on the spikes. And you can see that the green box is right around the spikes. So what we'll want to do is when this player, when he jumps onto these spikes, we'll want to restart the level so he starts right back there, and then the player shall lose a life. So what we can do, we can go back into our canvas where we have our pineapples, and we can create a player lives. So we can right click on the canvas, create a UI text mesh pro. We'll name this lives text because this will be the player's lives. We can put the text to 0 right now because we will keep this at 0 until we change it. You can move this up to this corner, and then we can add a UI image, and we'll name this player image. We'll add a little image of the player just so that we know that these are the player's lives and not how many pineapples or fruits you collected. So we can go to the main character, click your main character, get an animation that you want, like idle, and drag it into the image. Scale it up to something like 2, I think will work. And then move it over to here with the player's lives. Maybe we can align them so we can move that down. Then if we check in our game view, there we go, we have our player's lives. So if we go all the way back down to our level right here, what we'll want to do for these spikes is we'll want to add a tag to them. So we can do what we did for the pineapples, and we can check if we collide with them. If their tag is spikes, we can take a heart away. So we can add a tag. We can name this spike, and then go to our spike, and then add the tag spike. And then what we're going to want to do is go into our assets folder and go into the game manager script. Once we're in our C# script, we're going to want to add a few more variables. So up at the top, let's create a public integer, and we can name this player lives. This will be how many lives the player has. We can set this to something like 3 right now, because maybe the player will start out with 3 lives. And then we can create another public integer. We can name this player max lives, and we can set this to 3 also, because maybe the maximum player lives he can have is 3. And then we'll want to create another method. This method will be public. It'd be a void, and this method can be called take damage, because this will be the method that's called whenever the player takes any damage. So inside this method, we will just do player lives minus minus, so that just takes 1 away from our player lives, just like the plus plus we did in our pineapples. So in this player lives, we want to also create this text like we did here. So up at the top we can also create a public text mesh pro UGUI. We can name this player lives text. And then inside of this method we can write player lives text dot text. We'll set this equal to player lives. Actually, to make this work, we'll want to cut this little line of code and put it after we take something out from the player lives, because if we did it before, then it would still be the same and it wouldn't have changed. And then what we'll have to do here to make it not have the error, we'll have to string at the end. So it converts the integer to a string. So now that we have this, we're going to want to call this method whenever we take damage. So inside of this player movement script, down at the bottom in this OIN collision enter, we can create another if statement, and then if collision dot game object dot tag, and this will be if it is spike, and then if this is spike, we're going to want to call this method the take damage method. So inside of here we can do the game manager to get our reference to the game manager dot take damage, and there you go. This is now when we collide with the spikes, we will take damage. And what we'll want to do now is we'll want to check if we have no lives left, and then if we have no lives left, we will restart the whole entire thing. So what we can do is inside of our game manager script, let's create a private void, and we can name this check for game over. And then inside of this method, what we can do is what we'll want to do actually is we'll want to move the player back to the start, and we'll want to set his lives back to the max lives. So what we can do is we can do player lives is equal to the player max lives. So that means the player, his lives are automatically to the top. And then we'll also want to update the lives. So what we can do the player lives text dot text, and then we'll set this to the player lives dot toString. And then we'll want to teleport the player back to where he normally is. So what we can do up here, we can create a public transform, and we'll name this player start. This will be where the player starts. So inside of this game over, we can do, or we'll also need a public game object reference for the actual player himself, so we can name this player. So what we'll do is we'll do player dot transform is equal to the player start. So we're basically just teleporting we won't have to do just the player start. We'll set this equal to a new vector 3. We don't actually need a vector 3. At the back of this, we can do player.transform.position, and we'll set this equal to the player start.position. So we can just change the position of the player to the starting position. And then this is all if game over is actually true. So up at the top of this method, let's create an if statement. And then if our player lives are less than or equal to 0, then we will do all this. We will set the lives back to 3, move the player, and then change the lives on the text. And then we can just create an else. So this is if he's alive, just nothing. And inside of this else statement, we'll just do return. The return statement, this basically just gets us out of the method, so that means we won't have to do anything else if the player lives is not equal to 0. And then inside of update, we shall call this method. We'll call check for game over, just so that every second of this game, we shall check if we're losing or not. So inside the player movement, we're just taking damage right here. But maybe something else that we could do is that we can set the player back to the start again. So what we can do is we can get a reference to the player, or we can actually just get a reference to the game, get our reference to the game manager. So game manager dot player dot transform dot position, and we'll set this equal to game manager dot player start dot position. This is just making the player move back to the start of the player. So if we go back into our Unity editor, and once it compiles, we're going to have to add a few more things inside of our game manager, and then we're going to have to, and then we will check if our spikes are working or not. And then we'll create our player start so that the player always starts right here and not starts somewhere else. So we can go into our game manager, and down at this script, we'll have the player lives text, player start, and player. We can drag in the player for the game object. For the player lives text, we can drag that in from the canvas, and then the player start, we're going to have to create that. So right click on our hierarchy, create empty game object. We can name this player start. Right now, if we click W, we can see that this player starts right here. We're just going to drag this right on top of the player so that he will start right there. If you want your player to start somewhere else, like let's say right there, or there, or there, you can drag it to there. And then inside of our game manager, we'll drag in our player start. We'll go to our player, check that this script is working, and then we will go to our spike, check that we have the tag on it, and then we can click play to see if our spikes are working or not. So once we get into the Unity editor, we click play, we can see if our spikes are working the way that they are supposed to, and then if our lives are working the same way that they are supposed to. When we go into play mode, we can see that we can walk around, and then our lives get deducted by 1, our lives get deducted by 1 again, and then when we get down to 0, they go back to 3. And then you can see that we can run around, and then we will always teleport back to the start, even if we're all the way over to there. Thank you for following along through this tutorial. If you like this tutorial, please give our channel a like and a subscribe because it helps us grow.